Barack Obama got his BA from Columbia, his JD from Harvard. He taught for a number of years at the University of Chicago Law School. May I suppose that Tom Sowell is duly impressed?
You might say the road to hell is paved with Ivy League degrees.
All right. A few clips of the President of the United States delivering his State of the Union address earlier this year. Clip number 1.
Higher education can't be a luxury. It is an economic imperative that every family in America should be able to afford.
Higher education, an imperative. All he's asking is that all young Americans should have the same opportunity to get a really good education that Tom Sowell had. Tom?
I love the use of the word opportunity. You know, I had as much opportunity to become an NBA star as Michael Jordan had. It just happens that there was some difference in skill. And so the same thing with education. There is no point trying to run people through institutions that they have very little interest in and that they may not be suited for. In fact, I would argue that one of the problems of American education is you have a lot of people in college who have no interest in what a college is supposed to be, nor is there any reason why they should.
And so
So you water down the education of the people who are there to get an education because of the people who are not there for that purpose and who are, and who you're trying to appease in some way.
And is the impulse that we just saw of Barack Obama and his supporters to constantly, more and more people run them through college,
Yes.
through college, and that's what? That's to enhance the standing of intellectuals in society, to teach more and more Americans to defer to intellectuals? Is that part of what's going on?
It's to win votes, frankly.
All right. Straightforward as that. President Obama once again.
I will not cede the wind or solar or battery industry to China or Germany because we refuse to make the same commitment here. We've subsidized oil companies for a century. That's long enough.
This is pre-Solyndra, of course.
Pre-Solyndra. Tom?
You know, this notion of picking out something and calling it a good thing, like education or affordable housing or whatever it might be, everything is a matter of trade-off. What did the band say there?
That he will not cede wind or solar or the battery industry to China or Germany because we refuse to make the same commitment.
It's amazing that here is a man talking about 5 different industries, in none of which he has the slightest experience. You know, but because he has these degrees from the places you mentioned, he thinks, and people have told him how clever he is, he now thinks that he can do this.
So can you...
No human being on this planet could do this.
Can you explain, Tom, the particular appeal to intellectuals of the kind you describe here, of the green movement, of the environmental movement?
Oh, it shows them again in the role they relish. They're the wise and noble, forcing the rest of us poor dummies to do what's right, you know, even though we don't want to.
So it's what your old friend Karl Marx would have described as the will to power.
Yes.
All right. You don't want to cut them a little slack. I mean, you're just saying it's ego and pride and vanity.
Yes.
All right. Once again, the President of the United States.
Tax reform should follow the Buffett rule. If you make more than $1 million a year, you should not pay less than 30% in taxes. And my Republican friend Tom Coburn is right. Washington should stop subsidizing millionaires. In fact, if you're earning $1 million a year, you shouldn't get special tax subsidies or deductions. On the other hand, if you make under $250,000 a year, like 98% of American families, your taxes shouldn't go up.
I love it.
You're the one struggling.
Tom?
When people keep their own money, that's called subsidizing them. I love it. You know, that's the brilliance of intellectuals, that they can use words in such a malleable way that they can. I mean, Obama has an absolute talent for saying things that make no sense, but not only sound plausible, but inspiring. You know, we're subsidizing the oil companies when they deduct the cost of doing business in order to arrive at the figure of how much net income they have. Everybody does that.
Right. So this notion, though, that if you're rich, you ought to pay more. Straightforward enough, no?
It is straightforward, but it's also straightforward nonsense.
Why is that?
People don't. They often speak of people who are rich as people who happen to have money.
Right.
Extremely few people happen to have money.
There aren't that many Rockefellers.
Well, but Rockefeller didn't happen to have money.
But his heirs happen to have it.
Heirs happen to
Right.
have money.
So you're
but
driving
Rockefeller reduced the cost of oil to a fraction of what it had been before him,
Right.
benefiting millions of people across the country. Therefore, they bought their oil from Rockefeller rather than from people who had more expensive ways of producing oil. For example, one of them being the use of tank cars on the railroads. The progressives were livid that Rockefeller could ship his oil at a cheaper price than the other producers. It never occurred to them that Rockefeller shipped his oil in tank cars, which are a hell of a lot cheaper to transport than in barrels.
Right.
I mean, we still measure oil in barrels today, but we ship it in tankers.
Right.
And that's how he became a multi-billionaire.
So we know from the study of economic history that wealthy people get wealthy by creating jobs, lowering prices of
Yes.
of products. Rather than Bill Gates, the richest man in America, one of the richest men in the world, invented an entire industry that
Yes.
simply didn't. All right, we know all that, and we also know, as we mentioned earlier, that cutting taxes worked to spur economic growth in the 20s. Again, under John Kennedy in the 60s. Actually, it was Johnson who ended up. Most of the tax cuts took place, let's call it under the 60s, and then again in Ronald Reagan in the 1980s.
And then George W. Bush.
And George W. Bush. So how is it that he can stand there in the face of this overwhelming evidence and be taken seriously? I'm not asking now about Barack Obama as an intellectual. I'm asking about the people listening to him.
That's the question of the hour. You have people who don't stop and think. You've had dumbed-down education. You've had propagandistic education. And people, what he's saying connects with all those kinds of things.
All right.
In fact, it goes the other way too. I was just doing some research on Detroit and its decline, and they kept raising the city income tax. And every time they raised the tax rate, the tax revenues went down. In 2008, Charles Gibson put this to Obama when he was a candidate. He said, "Why are you for raising the tax rate on the rich? Because you often get more revenue at lower tax rates than at the higher tax rates." And he said, "Well, it's a question of social justice." In other words, he doesn't really care about whether the government raises more revenues. If he can get people mad at the rich and they vote for him, then it's a success. Just as Coleman Young's policies in Detroit were a great political success for him.
We have an election coming up in November. What's your sense? Good news or bad news when we wake up after Election Day? Will the intellectuals have triumphed or have been swept out of Washington?
I would think that the odds of their being swept out are no better than 50-50.
Do you have a candidate? As we record this, the Republican primary is still grinding on. Primaries are still grinding on.
There's none of the candidates of either party that would cause me to dance in the streets.
All right. Is there anything, as you look at the current prospect for this country and the Western world, that would cause you to dance in the streets?
If I thought that the voters had some sense of realism and that they were concerned with the larger questions rather than whose ex-wife said what, and so on, or you know what Governor Romney did or did not do when he was head of Bain Capital, that I would have, if they had some sense of the loss of freedom, which is infinitely more important than any of the specific issues by themselves. That is, Obamacare really is a huge step towards the loss of freedom. I mean, and it happens in small ways, but constantly. I mean, we can't have the light bulb that we want in our own home. We can't flush the toilet with the kind of toilet we want. We can't take a shower with the kind of shower head we want. We can't put our garbage out except and broken down by the way that some little gauleiters have decided that we ought to do it. I mean, that it's just the accretion of these things, many of which are too small to be significant in themselves. But in the aggregate, you can see the tendency of this. The people who think they know better and they ought to be telling us what to do, those people are the danger. And if you don't see that, then I'm not sure what the future is going to be like.